There's no such thing as a must-win Week 2 game, but the Cowboys and Giants really need wins this week. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It's a crossover edition of the Locked On Cowboys and Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. I am your host, Marcus Mosher from Locked On Cowboys. She is Patricia Traina from Locked On Giants, and we are getting you ready for a kind of big Week 2 matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. Patricia, let's start with your Giants. Coming out of Week 1, they did not look great. How big of a game is this for the Giants, and what are some of the biggest storylines going on with the Giants right now?
This is a huge game, Marcus. I mean, if the Giants go 0-2, I don't want to even see what social media is going to look like afterwards. I mean, that would not be good. That would be 0-2, not only to start the season, but also in the division. And as you know, if you don't win your division games, any hope that you have of making even a wild card goes down the tubes. So the Giants need this one, especially after coming out of the gate looking as sluggish as they did. And I think in terms of the biggest storylines, there's really so many. I mean, I think you could start with obviously Andrew Thomas and if he's going to be available for this game. I'm not so sure if he will be, but of course, as we're recording this, disclaimer, it is a Tuesday night, so I have not seen the injury report. But I think another story that's going to kind of linger a little bit is what the Giants will do at quarterback. Russell Wilson last week did not look good against the Commanders. Now, yes, he was under duress. Yes, there were some problems with connecting with the receivers, but Russell Wilson looked like a game manager, just seemed almost like reluctant on some of the throws, out of sorts, out of sync, kept his eyes to the ground when he was under pressure. So obviously now when you have a young quarterback like Jackson Dart, who looks so good in the preseason, he's right now the most popular guy in New York. At least in terms of football. So he's somebody everybody wants to see. And of course, with the report that there was a package of plays for him last week, everybody's now wondering, okay, if the Giants get off to another slow start in what is a must-win game for them, do they pull Russell Wilson and put Jackson Dart, who was named quarterback to by head coach Brian Daboll, do they make that switch this week?
Well, and one of the questions I want to ask you is, how much of it do you think it depends on Russell Wilson's performance versus the offensive line? Because I just have a hard time seeing Brian Daboll put Jackson Dart in the lineup if the offensive line's really struggling, because that's they don't want that, right? They don't want to get the young kid killed out there. But if the offensive line's holding up and Wilson's just making some bad throws, do you think that's a potential scenario where we could see Dart?
I think it could be. I mean, and you also make a good point. The offensive line was not very good last week. The interior of the offensive line in particular was just awful. Let's not sugarcoat this. So if, they luck out, they have Andrew Thomas back. If that line improves and Russell Wilson doesn't, then I think you've got to reevaluate where you're at. Now, the question that Brian Daboll has to answer is, do I want to rush this kid out here before he's ready? Because obviously they want to take their time with him. Ideally, they don't want him to have to play at all this year. But if they keep losing and looking sluggish as an offense, the pressure and the calls for Jackson Dart are going to intensify.
I want to talk about the defense because the Giants have invested a ton of money into that defense and high draft picks with Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Brian Burns they traded for. How do you think that unit looked in Week 1?
I think they looked like they had some time off. The run defense was not very good. It did not help that they lost Micah McFadden to a foot injury. But the run defense up front, I tell you, Dexter Lawrence, I always refer to him as an all-world defensive tackle. He had one of the quietest games I've ever seen him play. So that was a little bit of a concern. The Giants with the pass rushers, Abdul Carter, they utilized him in so many different ways, including as a spy on Jaden Daniels. I don't know that that's necessarily the best use of his talent, but to me, it almost seemed like they're still trying to figure out how to get all three of those guys on the field at once and have them work in tandem with Dexter up front and your old friend Chauncey Golston, who also had kind of a quiet game. So the pass rush, not quite as lethal as we thought it might be, but it could just be that they're still trying to figure things out. I mean, you would have thought they would have figured it out by now, but yeah, it's got to get better.
And on the Cowboys side of things, they played a really good game against Philadelphia in week 1, maybe better than anybody anticipated. Now, you didn't get the win, and I think there's still a lot of Cowboy fans that don't really believe in moral victories. And if they come out here in week 2, a game at home, and they lay an egg, nobody's going to care that they played good against Philadelphia 10 days ago, right? Like, they've got to come out and get a win. Now that we've seen this line over on FanDuel move a little bit, the Cowboys opened up this game as 3.5 point favorites, and now it's up to a 6-point favorite. And maybe they're adjusting based on what they saw in week 1. But for the Cowboys, this is a big game because their schedule, and obviously, Patricia, you know this because the Giants have a very similar schedule. It's brutal. Like, there's no easy games in the schedule. You've got to try to get some early season wins so you can just stay alive. And Landon and I have been talking about this for a while. Like, it's going to be a battle for this team to even be in the playoff hunt by the time we get to Thanksgiving. You've got to take care of business at home against a team that's, lesser, or at least on the same, playing field as you. I think the Cowboys, at least according to FanDuel, they're a better team right now. You've got to take care of business. And traditionally, 1 o'clock Eastern starts, noon starts Central Time. That's been a little bit of a bugaboo for the Cowboys. And without Micah Parsons, I don't know how they're going to generate pass rush, even against an offensive line that could be compromised without Andrew Thomas. It's just a big game where I think traditionally, Patricia, like, we've just picked the Cowboys kind of blindly because they have a lot of success against the Giants. I don't necessarily feel that way when your defense can't create pressure consistently.
Yeah, I mean, we're going through it here on this side of the ball as well, And, you mentioned Micah Parsons. And let me ask you, Marcus, how has that defense really been different? Because I think Jerry Jones said the whole thing with Micah Parsons is, we've got to stop the run. Well, doesn't everybody? But Micah Parsons, from where I'm sitting, was the Cowboys' best player on defense.
Yeah, I mean,
hands down. So how have they compensated for that?
It's been different. We saw Matt Eberflus use a lot of zone coverage, trying to keep Jalen Hurts in the pocket. Obviously, that didn't work very well. He ran all over, but the Cowboys were better against the run. In the second half, Saquon Barkley had 7 carries for 1 yard. Like, they actually stopped the run better than I've seen them do it in the last 20 years. But there's a compromise. Jalen Hurts was able to stay in the pocket and have all day to throw and move out whenever he wanted to. I'm going to be interested to see how they handle Russell Wilson. Do they blitz him? Do they just rush forward? Do they drop into zones? Brian Schottenheimer this week said, hey, I've got a lot of familiarity with Russell. I know what bothers him. I'm very interested to see the Cowboys game plan because you're right. Like, Micah Parsons was their best player. Now you've got to figure out a way to play defense without him. And that's not going to be easy.
Right. And, on the offensive side of the ball, Dak has had the Giants number for a number of years. I mean, that Dak, CeeDee Lamb connection, that to me is one to keep an eye on.
Let's talk about some of the matchups that we're the most excited to watch here in week 2. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety picks awards than anyone else. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all of the little details. And Mazda does too. They bring the same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel the Japanese craftsmanship in every single detail, from the metallic accents to the available Napa leather upholstery. It's absolutely fantastic. You can make your everyday drives feel like anything but, with smooth handling to fantastic controls. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. This episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. It's time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. This grape, ginger, and lime flavored shot brings the iconic taste of a golf course favorite to a non-alcoholic boost. Perfect for sinking birdies or making great memories with friends. It's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Whether you're out on the course and you just need a little bit of an extra boost to power through your day, 5 Hour Energy Transfusion delivers that clubhouse flavor that you love without ever leaving the green. I play a lot of golf. Locked On Cowboy listeners know that. But, man, sometimes you get to that 13th, 14th hole. You just need that little bit of boost to get you through your round. And golf is all about the good times with good people and good flavors. And that grape, ginger, lime flavor of 5 Hour Energy Transfusion gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without leaving the course or chasing down the bev cart. Now you can amp up the fun even more. Just buy, snap, and enter for a chance to win a dream golf trip for two for any golf tournament in the U.S. Tee up that trip. Visit 5hewin.com for full rules and entry. No purchase necessary. Excludes the Masters Tournament. Ends October 31st, 2025. Welcome back to this crossover edition of the Locked On Cowboys and Locked On Giants podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Patricia, let's talk about some matchups that we are excited to see here in week 2. What do you got?
Yeah, I'm going to start off. I kind of mentioned it at the end of last segment. CeeDee Lamb against Paulson Adebo. And, CeeDee Lamb, he could play outside. He could play in the slot. I think he's going to be a really interesting matchup. Paulson Adebo last week did a pretty good job against Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin didn't really have as big of an impact when he went up against Paulson Adebo. So that's certainly one to keep an eye on. I want to see how the Giants offensive line obviously holds up against a Micah Parsons less Dallas defensive front. I think, if this is going to be a bounce back game, a get right game for that offensive line, this could potentially be it. And then, of course, you have Dak, who has just been an absolute thorn in the side of the New York Giants defense with his mobility and whatnot. And he just has had their number. So how are they going to slow him down? Are they going to assign a spy to him? Last week we saw instances where Abdul Carter spied Jaden Daniels. Again, not the best use of his talent, but maybe they do that again in order to keep everything, under wraps.
I'm glad that you pointed out the CD matchup because this is one that the Cowboys have historically had a lot of success. Dak Prescott's missed quite a few of these Giants games, and CeeDee Lamb is still averaging about 86 receiving yards per game. And honestly, when I was watching that week 1 game and I saw Dory Jackson lined up opposite, it brought me back to all these great memories of the Cowboys playing the Giants over the last couple of years. But Paulson Adebo is going to be a much tougher opponent than what CeeDee Lamb has traditionally saw against the Giants. I'm going to be curious to see how Brian Schottenheimer uses him. Do they try to play him on the outside? Do they bring him in the slot? Do they do some things to try to avoid that matchup? Or do they let CeeDee Lamb go against Paulson Adebo, and then maybe feature more of George Pickens this week? I'm not sure, but I will say one thing, Patricia. After that 3-4 drop game from CeeDee Lamb, he was in the facility early on Friday morning, catching balls from the jugs machine. He has traditionally been a player when he has a poor game, bounces back in a big way. I would expect the Cowboys to feed Lamb early and often in this one.
Yeah, I think so too. And, to your point, the Giants last week rotated, if you will, at cornerback 2. It was Cordell Flott and Deontay Banks. It's like they can't decide who's going to be the guy. So they had Cordell Flott in on first and second down. Then you brought Banks in on third down. I don't know how long they plan to keep doing that. I don't think it's an ideal setup, to be honest with you. But you make a good point. If Adebo's going to draw CeeDee Lamb, who's going to be responsible for George Pickens? Well, it's going to be one of those two guys. And that's a matchup I don't really like.
Another one that I'm looking at is the Cowboys offensive tackles, Tyler Guyton and Terrence Steele, against the edge rushers of the New York Giants. Now, last week, Tyler Guyton returned to the lineup after missing basically the entire summer with a knee injury. He played okay. He did give up 5 pressures. I think Cowboy fans gave him a little bit of grace. But this week, it's Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau. and you're not going to be able to help on both guys. So they're going to put Tyler Guyton and Terrence Steele on an island. And I would think if the Cowboys can block the Giants, they should have a lot of open lanes in the passing game. But this is why the Giants went out and got all these guys, because they believe that they can win games just based on their pass rush. I can't wait to see how the Cowboys tackles fare against this awesome pass rush trio.
Who do you think they'll double?
My guess is that it'll probably be Burns on Terrence Steele's side, and it probably won't be a double. It'll be more like chipping and then releasing out. But I'll bet that it's Burns is the guy that they focus more of their attention on.
Would make sense. Burns had a really good game. He was a bright spot actually against the Commanders. So that would certainly make sense. But look, it presents a golden opportunity for Thibodeau if he's on the other side, or if it's Carter, to beat their man one-on-one. And that's really, what it boils down to. That's why the Giants went out and got all these guys, because they wanted to set up one-on-one matchups and have an opportunity to get home a little bit more.
Can we talk about the Giants linebackers really quickly? Because you mentioned the Micah McFadden injury, one of their key linebackers. He's going to miss, according to the latest reports, a significant amount of time this season. What does the linebacker room look like going into week 2? Because again, that has been traditionally a spot that Dak Prescott has targeted over the middle of the field. What does it look like here against Dallas?
Well, obviously you have Bobby Okereke in the middle. Bobby Okereke coming back off of the back injury that ended his season early last year. Still, to me, didn't quite look like the Bobby Okereke that we all know and love from 2023. He had, I think, something like 17 tackles, but they were really quiet tackles. Yeah. There wasn't really an impact player in the bunch, if you will. So now with Micah McFadden going to miss all this time, the next man up is second-year man, Darius Muaso, excuse me, I always mispronounce that name. He's a guy who, when he came into the lineup, little overmatched, especially against the tight end, which is where I am concerned. And it's interesting because the Giants' run defense, I mentioned that's been a problem. When Micah McFadden was in there for that handful of plays, Washington was able to average 5.8 yards per rushing attempt, which is not great. But when Micah McFadden exited the game, that average went up to 7.1 yards. Okay? So I expect that group to get targeted. I expect the tight end to work over the middle. We'll probably see a bunch of passes over the middle to the tight ends. And yeah, I'm going to be curious to see if maybe they bring down Dane Belton, who is kind of a hybrid, a safety linebacker, to help secure the middle of the field.
Well, and this is where it's fascinating because Brian Schottenheimer wants to run the ball. And actually, the Cowboys had a lot of success last week running the ball. Do they, try to go more big personnel and try to, to run the ball with some of these smaller edges? Because as great as Abdul Carter and Brian Burns are, they're not particularly big. I mean, Brian Burns is tall, but he's not a big player, right? I wouldn't be surprised if that's the philosophy for Dallas this week is, hey, we're going to go 2 tight ends, we're going to run the ball, and we're going to challenge your linebackers to make plays downhill. It wouldn't be a bad strategy. And then take your shots down the field to CeeDee Lamb and Pickens. I can't wait for the matchups. This is going to be a very fun cat and mouse game on Sunday.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this as well because, like I said, Dak Prescott has always been a thorn in the side of the Giants. The Giants have not won in Dallas since, I think, 2016. They are so overdue. But, coming off of
Dak Prescott's first start.
Yeah,
that was his first start. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, coming off the Washington game, look, the Giants basically played Washington tight for most of the game, and then it slipped away at the end because there's only so much that the defense can do. They can only hold up for so long. At some point, the offense has to contribute. And, the offense to me looked a little herky-jerky. There was no smoothness, no rhythm, no camaraderie, if you will. And that's why Malik Neighbors, I think, got upset. He complained. He talked about the energy was lacking, which was kind of a surprise because you've had how many weeks to prepare for this?
Week 1, right.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'd like to think that things are going to be a little smoother, but we'll see because, from the Giants perspective, from the Giant fan perspective, it's like, new year, same old, same old.
All right, let's talk about some keys to victory for both the Giants and the Cowboys going into week 2. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure that you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love FanDuel because it allows me to bet however I want to bet. Like, I love the futures market. I love going on a Tuesday morning, seeing who's the favorite to win each division, who are the current Super Bowl favorites. And personally, I love checking in on like the Defensive Player of the Year award. Always one of my favorites. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the best way to add just a little bit more energy and juice to your Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That is FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to this crossover edition of the Locked On Cowboys and Locked On Giants podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, get a double dose of the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler, the Madman Roland, gives you a shot of espresso to start your football day. And then our guy, Tony Wiggins, takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Patricia, what do the Giants need to do on Sunday to get their first win of the season?
Yeah, I think from an offensive perspective, they've got to run the ball. I mean, the Cowboys, they allowed 158 yards against an Eagles team, a Saquon Barkley-led Eagles team. The Cowboys' run defense, from what I can gather, not what it used to be. The Giants, believe it or not, their running game, non-existent. And that problem was the interior of the offensive line. The guys weren't opening holes, and then they weren't getting to the second level and just clearing out bodies and whatnot. The Giants' running game was atrocious. And I'll give you some numbers. Last week against the Commanders, the running backs ran 15 times out of the 23 total rushing attempts, 30 out of the 74 yards, right? 2.0 yards per attempt. That ain't going to cut it. No. Okay. The Giants running backs only forced 2 missed tackles, again, because they weren't getting the push up front. They averaged 0.13 yards before contact, 1.86 yards after contact. That all via True Media, by the way. So the Giants, if you can get the run game going, now maybe you set up play action. Now maybe you set things up to where you can take a few shots deep down the field because, you don't have to worry about being having guys in the box, crowding the box. That's got to be, I think, objective number 1. Objective number 2, from the defensive side of the ball, it's, same old. Get after Dak. Don't let him burn you with his legs. That's where he's most dangerous. Never mind the passing. They can corral that if they need to. I think they have the guys to do that. Paulson Adebo, I mentioned. Tyler Newman's back. Javon Holland is a new addition. They did a good job, I think, overall, corralling the Washington passing attack. But Dak Prescott, he's a totally different animal. This is a guy that if you let him burn you with his legs, you're gonna be in for a long afternoon.
Yeah, and now Dak doesn't run as much as he used to, but it's just part of his game now where it's like, if you blitz him, he's so good at like getting outside the pocket. And that's where he can be really dangerous. It's like he scramble out to his right, make a big play down the field. And we saw him even against the Eagles last week. Like, he's not the same athlete that he used to be because of some of the lower body injuries, but he's become a really smart runner. And honestly, that's almost more important now. It's like, okay, it's 3rd and 4. He's going to take off and get 5 yards, and it's not going to be sexy or anything like that. He's just going to do what needs to be done. He's had so much command of this offense now. And that's the thing for the Cowboys. It's like, you've got to start fast. They started fast against the Eagles and it kept them in this game. What you don't want to do is get behind in this game, get behind a touchdown, 10 points, and then get into a situation where you have to pass the football, because that's when Abdul Carter and Brian Burns can just pin their ears back and go. So it's getting an early start, running the ball, and then just don't let Russell Wilson make the big plays down the field. Like, what you want to do, this is where Matt Eberflus defense, I think, should line up well, is you want the Giants to put together 10, 12 play drives, because eventually you're hoping that a mistake happens. You don't want those moon balls to Malik Neighbors or Darius Slayton down the sideline. Like, that's how you let this game slip away. So I expect the Cowboys to allow Wilson to dink and dunk if he wants to, make him stay in the pocket. That's how I think they're at least going to try to play this game. We'll see if it works. And the last thing I want to mention, Patricia, like, you are a 6-point favorite. The Cowboys are 6-point favorites. Don't throw away this game with turnovers and penalties. And that's what they did last week against Philadelphia. Like, they are not good enough to overcome those kind of back-breaking mistakes. If you do that against a lesser Giants team, you're going to lose and be an 0-2 and be in an awful spot going into week 3.
You know, I feel like we could say the same thing because the penalties, the mistakes, they have all come back to bite the Giants, not just, this past week, but last year. And I've said the same thing about the Giants. They're not good enough at this point to overcome those mistakes. So nobody's going to play a perfect game. This doesn't exist, but you want to minimize the mistakes. And, look, I go back to last week, how the Giants had 6 tries inside the 5-yard line, and they couldn't punch the ball into the end zone because they kept shooting themselves in the foot. So you can't have that. And that's another key, just real quick, the red zone productivity. The Giants have been awful in the red zone the last week and last year. That's got to be addressed.
I'm trying to envision what Cowboys Twitter is going to look like. And the same for Giants Twitter. If they lose this game and go 0-2, it's not going to be fun, Patricia. It's going to happen to one of these teams. We're each hoping it's not our team. That is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making this crossover edition of the Locked On Giants and Locked On Cowboys podcast your first listen of the day. Follow Patricia on Twitter at Patricia_Traina. I am at Marcus_Mosher. Enjoy the games, and we'll see you guys right back here on Friday.